So right now, what I'm seeing is that AI businesses are attracting that kind of interest, right? And so, the big question that we're all asking ourselves is, will businesses that can attract capital for AI be able to enter the travel industry and disrupt it? Or will travel companies fundamentally become AI companies and disrupt themselves?
As WIT marks its 20th year in 2025, we turn the spotlight on our community to tell their stories and share their views on the evolution of online travel and technology. Conversations on Turning 20 is the collective story of WIT. As a Chinese saying goes, 以古为鉴,可以知形体. By using history as a mirror, one can understand the rise and fall of things.
The early days, as I got involved, we saw this, opportunity in the Asia region, customers growing, getting interested, and there was just so many problems to sort out. We thought, wow, this is going to be fun and exciting and interesting. Once you got into it, you realized, wow, there were so many problems we had to solve. Payments, mobile adoption wasn't there yet. And actually, when mobile adoption did explode, it was actually more of a problem than a great thing. Suddenly, we needed multiple platforms and it didn't really work well on a mobile screen. So it was just an endless set of miseries of trying to solve things that didn't work properly. And at the same time, sign up thousands of partners around the region, be able to speak, in digital language in so many different languages. And then we started to realize, we might have to localize, which is again another big problem to solve. So it was just a roller coaster where we were just working around the clock, solving one problem after the next. And that was just the character, the energy of the early days. Oh God, no. Oh God, no. No. Not at all. Um, so, I mean, I think that that acquisition, was at a time where there was a much bigger thing going on, which was the global financial crisis. Um, Certainly, there were two things of all about that acquisition. So there were a number of acquisitions around that time. So taking you way back to say 2007, there was a lot of smaller companies in Asia, and the thought was, and I knew all of them, because we were thinking, this is something I don't think I've ever talked about with anybody else, but we were thinking, well, I was thinking, why don't we roll up all these small companies into one big Asian player and see if we can sell it to one of the big American companies, right? That's what I was thinking about, right? That was my thought process. I was like, well, it's going to be hard to build a really great travel brand in Asia, and we'll probably get put out of business by somebody big, and who knows if we have a future. So maybe I should roll up all these small companies in Asia and try to, and once we, get it big enough, it'll be really attractive. There's enough money to go around. We could sell it to one of the big players, which, if you remember, was Travelocity, Expedia, Orbitz, and then this little company, Priceline, which is not all that exciting, but was growing because it was doing some things. Started to get interested in Europe and. So, in those days, the big thing that really happened, was so as part of that, activity where I was looking to roll up companies, I looked at all the other competitors in the space and they were all sort of in that same boat. Like maybe we should sell, maybe we should monetize, maybe we should, partner. And so there's a lot of activity on the deal space at the very early stages because in those days, we really, in Asia, many of us didn't think we had a chance to survive in the, you know, shadow of these giant what appeared in those days, it's sort of ironic, like these giant American players, Orbitz, Travelocity, Expedia, oh yeah, and maybe Priceline. It just shows you how fast things changed. So you asked about what was the sort of defining moment. And so around that time, there was a series of I think many of us in Asia thought, especially those of us old enough to have lived through the dot-com boom and explosion, around 2000, that, things were looking pretty frothy in the market, and maybe there would be a recession and what would happen to us all in a tough economic climate. And, we were right that that was coming. So there were a series of transactions that were taking place around 2007, in the context of, maybe there's gonna be a business cycle. But, what was interesting was definitely not, the transaction, between myself and what ended up being Priceline, which is a whole 'nother story. But really just the fact that everybody was transacting. So I'll just, name a couple that, you may or may not remember. There was Asia Hotels that got sold to Cendant. John Stoneham, who I think was the brilliant, amazing guy. And there was Asia Rooms that got bought by was it TUI, I think. Um, and there was Hotel Travel was another one that got bought by what ended up being Make My Trip in India, and, there were other of these transactions that happened around the same time, and the biggest was Hotel Club. If you remember that, that was Yuri and, who else was involved in that one? I can't remember what that got sold to Sendant, right? And so all these transactions were, unfolding in the industry sort of in the wake of, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen with these big American players coming into the Asia market? And what happens if there's a recession or something scary?" Um, and we were sort of thinking about the same thing. We could not pull off the roll up because everybody was doing their own thing. And so we were thinking, well, we should probably find safety somewhere as well. Um, and that was really, let's find a home somewhere in one of these, giant companies that's going to kill us all, right? And anyway, I mean, without going into all the details, the global financial crisis did hit. We were, probably in a better position than some of these other companies in the sense that we were really dedicated in solving some of these problems, and we were able to learn from that acquisition. We were able to learn a little bit more about what Priceline did, what Booking did, but we were very, driven and independent, and we made a couple of very good operating decisions around that time. And as it turned out, everything changed through the global financial crisis. Um, a lot of small players, had to retrench. The, American market completely transformed. Booking.com, which was an acquisition done around that time by Priceline, became the dominant player. Well, let's not call it dominant because it's such a competitive market, but I would say became, one of the strongest, if not the most exciting of the, OTAs, and that really changed the whole scope. And today, you don't really see Orbitz is gone, absorbed by Expedia, Travelocity is gone, Zuji is gone, all either absorbed. Even What If, which was a homegrown, fabulous company, probably one of the ones that I loved the most and used and was a big fan of, also kind of got absorbed and disappeared. And Expedia, which absorbed so many companies, today, is still very much an American-focused company and not as huge a player in the Asia Pacific region. So much has changed. And that global financial crisis um, changed the character of the market. And through that, the American players, ceased to become the kind of dreaded, death of all the smaller players in Asia. We were left with a few players As we came out of the global financial crisis, there was QE, quantitative easing. So the US government and Fed released so much capital into the markets, and so did other banks around the world, that it flooded the market with capital. And that financed a wave of homegrown, highly localized companies in APAC, which one of which is you know Trip.com, which is really C-Trip, as we all know it, you know, were born in that sort of localization, ability to spend liberally for a number of years. So that's what really changed the character of the market. So I would say the ebb and flow of the macro, global financial crisis, QE, um, that changed the character of the market, and that was a big turning point. And for us, it was, the difference between success and death was navigating that challenge of that macro and making very good decisions throughout. It was, and I would say two fundamental things about finding a home inside of a big company. One was, if the company is doing interesting things in different parts of the business, maybe I'll give you a couple. You can learn from those. If they'll let you inside and show you what they're doing, show you maybe what's working, what's not working, that's super advantageous. We definitely benefited from that being inside Priceline. Number two is, we picked the company that we thought would interfere the least with us. I mean, that is the truth, right? That's one of the major reasons that we picked them, is because they had a model which had allowed Booking.com to operate very independently, and we didn't want a lot of interference from a Norwalk-based company, micromanaging our business 9,000 miles away in Asia. We wanted independence, and that was a big part of it. So if you can get that balance of learning things, and I would say the last sort of thing, you learn things, but you can actualize, right? And the last thing for me was the confidence, that I didn't have to worry as much when you're an entrepreneur and you're poor. You have 2 nickels in your pocket, and you're thinking, "Boy, at any minute I could lose everything, and have to start all over again." That fear of, and many of today's entrepreneurs have been handed so much venture capital and private equity capital, they don't know what that feels like. Some of them have come out of Ivy League schools and gone and gotten their first 100 million of financing in the first, like, year, and so anyway, that the feeling of fear when you're part of something bigger gives you the confidence to operate, that, hey, there's a few dollars in the bank. I can pay if I wanna send my kids to school or be able to go on vacation or go out for dinner, I can do that, and so I can just work on building a great company, and I don't have to stress about, like, week by week survival. Now, as it turned out, we never really needed much help from our group company that way. We didn't need cash injections. We didn't really need anything from them. But it was nice to know that it was there, and that confidence for an operator, that can make a big difference. I mean, boy, are there some great stories, some cowboy stories from those early days about some of those companies. We won't go into it here, but there are some great, APAC cowboy stories of stuff that could only happen in, Pattaya or Thailand or Malaysia. There's just some great stuff that someday probably should be put down in a book or on a podcast or whatever. First of all, if you ask most executives that question, probably 9 out of 10 are gonna say AI, right? I mean, they're all gonna say that AI is going to be a transformational, um, technology in the same way that the internet was, in the late '90s, uh, but arguably, AI is happening so much faster because in the internet world, we had to learn, and I was involved very early on. First thing we had to study SGML, and then we had to learn how to write code in HTML, and all that sat on a layer of Unix or the internet was very technical for many many years. Um, it's today you could use GoDaddy to build a website or even a mobile app, and have rudimentary features through tool sets that have been developed as software as a service. Um, but AI is just gonna happen so much faster because the need for technical skill is reduced dramatically, right? So, the ability to say, "Code me a website that does the following thing," and have it be done verbally in seconds. So this AI, transformation is gonna happen is like the internet on steroids, right? It's just gonna happen so much faster. So that is certainly, going to be, a major transformation for the travel industry and all industries. Um, if you look at the character of the travel industry, however, do you think that that AI will fundamentally change the players in the space? I'm not so sure about that. Um, the internet changed players completely. I'm not so sure that the players change, except maybe the players that fail to adapt to AI might die. There will be some parts of the business, some that get completely disrupted, but it may some of the same players, may be the same players in, 10 years as a result. I do think there's also a macro at play again. Um, and, you look at what the gyrations of the stock market and, the impact of, tariffs and other kinds of geopolitical events around the world in APAC. We have gone from a world in which um, China was a relatively small, not that interesting market. I mean, look, honestly, go back pre-C-Trip to, like, when I was first operating in the early 2000s, and China was just not that exciting a market. We weren't going to prioritize China because it was too small, um, and complicated and hard to get around, and there was just a lot more excitement for us about Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia. Um, you know, so we just said, "Well, China," and then you look at what's happened, in 15, 20 years, and that's just become such a huge marketplace. And arguably one of the best companies in the world is a homegrown Chinese company, which is, now called Trip.com, so that it can pursue international and global ambitions, right? So things have changed. Marketplaces, have really changed, and what could happen and so we do need to be aware that, geopolitical conflict has a way of, um, shaping the markets and the players that exist, and our industry. So it is something that we don't talk about a lot in travel because you know what? We all get along, right? Like, and we're all in the travel industry, we all kind of like each other. We're all involved in making people's dreams come true. So when we all get together, there's none of that, right? When I see the folks that we compete with from different countries, like it's a love fest, right? Like we really enjoy each other's company. And so within our industry, like it's weird, right? I mean, we all like each other so much because we all are involved in this great industry. So, but outside the world, these events, finance, geopolitical conflict, these things have a way of making major changes. So I think those two events are going to shape the travel industry in the APAC region and the technology, considerably over the next 5 or 10 years. because when we get together, what do we all get to do, right? We all get to, take people from one place and drop them in another place, either to get their work done, or to have a great experience, or to find a tour, or we get to do that. So when you talk to these people, even though we're busy competing and trying to find out, "Oh, what are they doing this week? We got to copy that, or we got to do a better job of this," or all that competitiveness. When we get together, we're like, "Yeah, you do the same thing as I do. Like, this is great. Let's all talk about what's happening in the world." And so, yeah, it is a wonderful place to work. So I remember once a former CEO of Priceline Booking Holdings Group posited the same question at a strategic offsite, and the essence, and I took it in a very bad way. It was like, well, I think this person said, you know, uh, businesses like Agoda lack a competitive core. And what that meant was we didn't have a big home market where we were really, really big. We were kind of all over the place. And could that really be successful, right? Whereas, obviously, C-Trip had China, and, Traveloka appeared to have Indonesia. Make My Trip has India. Um, and so, again, not to sound like a broken record, but I think that that was largely a function of QE, of quantitative easing. The fact that capital is really one of the big disruptors in these industries. Not just, we tend to look at technology as the disruptor, but capital is a major disruptor. And when capital can flow in the ways that it has, that can really disrupt an industry. So these big markets, all of a sudden, nobody could raise money. Like when I went to raise money in 2005, 6, people were looked at me like, wait a minute, so you're not profitable and you're in Asia, and aren't all those Asian companies just going to be owned by Expedia and Priceline and Orbitz and Travelocity? Nobody wanted to put, real money into the business. Fast forward 8 years later, if you were in Indonesia, say we're going to be really big in Indonesia, suddenly you could raise 100 million, right? Not, or billion, right? So I think the power, the notion that these big local markets is really a notion of the QE interest in capital flowing into these big markets, and that's what made this work. Now, there are other things that matter. Scale and technology, the ability to solve complex computational problems, at scale. If you can't do that today, you can't deploy resources effectively, then it's tougher today. So, but is somebody gonna so, like, what's disruptive? Something that can attract massive amounts of capital. So AI businesses are getting funded at that level, right? They are getting billions of dollars of funding without having to produce profits. That can be very disruptive. So, I don't see anymore, somebody coming in and saying, "Okay, I'm gonna be big in travel in Indonesia, give me money." That's already happened. That's over. And even quite frankly, in China, it is, although China is always a little bit more interesting because it's higher risk and it's up and down and it's a big market. And so maybe, but I think mostly we are talking about the idea that technology businesses could be very disruptive from a um, capital perspective, rather. And so I think there is a play for businesses that stretch across markets, as long as they are super technical. Um, so the answer is no. I don't believe that you've got to have a home market, but yes, I believe that if you are operating against companies that can deploy capital and raise capital in a very disruptive manner, then you could be in trouble. So, having lived through it, I mean, I lived through that experience of suddenly China, Indonesia, India having access to capital and being able to lose a lot more money, quite frankly, than we could lose. How do you adapt to that is very disruptive, and those companies that have that ability can capture market share. It's expensive, and it's may not in my view, it's not a particularly good use of, shareholder capital, but nonetheless, it is very disruptive, and you could end up, 5 years down the road with a very different kind of competitor. So look at where the money's going, where the money is going in a disruptive, aggressive fashion, and that's where you need to, focus your attention. So right now, what I'm seeing is that AI businesses are attracting that kind of interest, right? And so, the big question that we're all asking ourselves is, will businesses that can attract capital for AI be able to enter the travel industry, and disrupt it? Or will travel companies fundamentally become AI companies and disrupt themselves? Um, so my personal view at this point is that there are enough technical travel companies out there such that, yes, some of the ones who don't execute, don't innovate will fall away, and maybe even a couple of big ones. But there are enough really good travel companies out there to maintain and to disrupt themselves in AI. There might be, some non-travel, more pure technology play companies that make a play for travel. So, like, lots of people ask me, "Well, what about, like, a combination of, you know, uh, Perplexity and, some other player that wants to enter travel, um, more aggressively. I don't know, Perplexity and Uber, right? Or, Gemini, and Amazon, right? Like, is there a path where, an AI company gets together with, a stronger company that has customers and distribution and makes a play for travel? That could happen, um, but it's more likely to trigger a series of other transactions where the OTAs make wider based, partnerships. So I think that the travel companies are in a position, they're mature enough. If you look back to the internet days, nobody knew anything about the internet, right? There were some travel companies, the ones in, Washington and Seattle and Portland and whatever, they were pretty technical, so they were able to adapt the internet pretty quickly. The ones that couldn't, there wasn't that many who could, right? So there are new companies that popped up, that were technical, and so I think the travel industry is pretty technical today. So yeah, so I don't think that, we're gonna see as the kind of shifts in players that we maybe have seen in the past, but these businesses, some of them will not look like they look today. Like, if you look at some industries that mostly are about organizing data, those industries are like, for example, meta search, is likely to be completely disrupted by AI, right? It's not gonna look anything like it does today, right? So then the next question, like I posited to you, which is will they disrupt themselves effectively, or will they be disrupted? So there are some problems that are really getting a lot of attention that are getting solved. So like you said, the front end, there's a million trip planner companies, right? And so this problem of, like, I need to find a dog-friendly hotel that has a, great bar and a great gym, right? So somewhere near my office in Singapore, right? So, like, this is what I'm looking for. I wanna bring my dog, I wanna go to the gym, and I wanna have a drink. That problem is getting plenty of attention, right? Um, and then as you go through, and then another problem that's getting, a lot of attention is coding, right? So, we spend huge sums of money, in the, travel industry on development, and so how developers deploy code, write code, that's getting a lot of attention. So that's getting disrupted. That's becoming a lot more efficient through AI. So how we optimize the factory, how we make the grocery store better organized so when you come in, so like getting into the grocery store is getting disrupted pretty easily, a lot of attention. The grocery store itself is getting more efficient, through all the technology and code and deployment and tools that are coming in from AI. That's getting so as you go to the back end, I think that there are some parts of the back and I'm really interested in the back end because the or some people will call it the bottom of the funnel, right? I'm interested in why people give me their money. I give you lots of choices. I give you lots of flights. I work really hard to get you great prices, right? So that's a big part. That's a very complex problem that it will continue to be one of the most interesting problems to solve. How do I ensure my number one job when I was running Agoda is the thing that I took the most seriously is I need to get you the best price. If I'm not doing that, I am failing as a CEO. Um, and it's one thing to, like, lose a ton of money, like, I could always just lose a ton of money, uh, that but I need to make a reasonable profit, the minimum amount of profit that my stakeholders demand, but I need to get you the best price as a customer. That's the thing that is most important, and that problem will continue to be we could talk more about that, but that problem will continue to be a complex problem to solve. But then as you go down to the bottom of the funnel, so there's a couple reasons that you give me your money, right? And one is, I got you the best price, right? So if I get you the best price, but that's not the only reason, right? A lot of times I'm getting you the best price, but so is, Susan over there. Susan's also getting you the best price. So both of us are getting you the best price. So the question is, why do you give your money to Rob as opposed to Susan, right? That is the question, and there are a number of answers to that. Sometimes it's trust. Sometimes it's ease. It's fast. It's easy to, use. Sometimes I'm getting loyalty points maybe from my credit card. Um, Maybe I can make changes more easily. There's lots of these bottom of the funnel challenges, and there's one that, maybe the experience of giving you my money gives me certain benefits, that I really love, and not only am I willing to pick Rob over Susan, but I'm willing to actually spend $5 more or $10 more for that experience. So this is the crux of what I like to think about, where I think there is, still work to be done. Travel 2045, um, probably, uh, very quick to get things done, you know, um, defining my trip in, seconds, what kind of trip is this? And very quickly, um, getting right to, right through the process of booking and transaction and a whole series of connected trip activities happening in an instant. Right. And money flowing, literally the whole process. By the way, I was looking at my travel process the other day. It's like I do all my own booking. I've always done all my own booking. I mean, even when I was running Agoda, I do my own flights, my own hotels, my own tours. I like to do that stuff. And it takes me and my own planning for which itineraries and sometimes it's complicated. I It takes me a few hours, like it's like 4 or 5 hours of solid work per trip. And I think 2045, that's like 45 seconds. It's amazing how fast things can go bad. Um, and, you know, uh, the for us, before there was COVID, there was SARS. Um, I remember, I was flying into Hong Kong and uh, our original business, we were just working on pivoting to Agoda, and we were, working really hard. We're trying to keep this older business alive. And as I was flying into Hong Kong, people were coming into these giant hazmat suits, like space aliens, into the plane and spraying everybody. And during that week, everybody was dying. And I mean everybody. The doctors who are heroes, the WHO doctors who were flying into Hong Kong, they were dying of SARS, like right away. And, they're not like idiots. They were taking precautions. So there was a sense of like maybe this was the end of the world for like a few weeks. Maybe there was like a 4 or 5 week period where it was like, maybe we need to start spending some time with family. Um, and it was real scary. And my business, was basically bankrupt. We owed everybody money. All of the revenue evaporated. And in those days, we were buying a lot of our products from wholesalers, who were the traditional travel players of the industry. They were first on the ground in every market. They were the ones that had the relationships. They had to wine and dine. They had to wine and dine people. Like it was a very traditional, old school business. And at some point at during the show, I realized we owe everybody money. And so did it everybody owed everybody money. It was pretty bad. And so I guess one thing I'll share with you is I, went and visited those people and told them that we couldn't pay them, but that we would. And I, had to, make a payment schedule that was long and painful for everybody. But one thing I learned about that experience is I was brutally honest, and I was committed to paying back the money, and we did. And that really helped us build, relationships over the years, that I think ended up being very valuable. Um, but, it took a lot. And I went hat in hand personally, to visit them in person. And, so remote work is one thing, but, sometimes you've got to communicate something, face to face. And that really taught me a lot about business. I was a young man that, there's no time for ego. It can go very bad. Be prepared to, respect your partners and tell them the truth. Don't sell them a lot of goods. If you've got problems, talk to them directly about what it is and work with them, and it'll really, help you in the long run. Yeah, so that's one little story. Um, sometimes you think of Agoda as a big company, but we've had so many times when, we couldn't afford toilet paper. We were bringing toilet paper in from our, hotel into the office, um, because we were trying to save money. We could only afford to go out to dinner once a week. There was a lot of those times which teach you, humility, and also just the reality that things can go wrong pretty quick. You hear the sort of old saying, A players hire A players and B players hire C players, right? There are some people that are very magnetic that can bring in great talent. And, no amount of HR directors or recruiters is going to solve your people problem, right? And so it is about people, but it's about people who can hire talented people, inspire talented people, manage talented people. And not everybody can do that. You can't do it by hiring, Heidrick and Struggles and, and having your HR director send you resumes and offering them, lots and lots of money. It's more than that, right? Good people don't just go for the money in the job, and they sure as hell don't stay for the money in the job. They stay because they're around people that they respect, that they learn from, that help them actualize, right? It is a very human story at the end, because those humans are the ones developing the code, figuring out AI, helping you pivot, right? Making the deals that are necessary to adapt to the changes in AI, and, to adapt to the disruptive nature of capital. So like if you don't have the right people around you to help you make those pivots, it won't matter how much money you make or how successful you are or what your resume says. So you need people who can adapt and who are magnetic and who can bring in other talent. That is the nature of the game in our industry.